Welcome to Executive Leaders Radio, your spot in the corner office, the radio show where executives share their secrets to success. Executive Leaders Radio.
You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio, broadcast from the headquarters, Life Sciences, Pennsylvania, here in Pennsylvania. This is your host, Herb Cohen, with my co-hosts, Jeff Mack and Shannon Lane, Newmark Knight Frank, Kate Heeman, Prelude Solutions, Ethan Milrod, GoTo, Drew Hanlon, Peter Snelling, Merrill Lynch, and John Jacobs, Harmony Biosciences. Jeff, can you please give us a rundown on who we have on the air today?
Happy to, Herb, and I'd first like to thank John Jacobs, CEO of Harmony Biosciences, for co-hosting with us today. We have Jim Walker, President and CEO of Velicept Therapeutics, Azam, President and CEO of Tmunity Therapeutics, Steve Kelly, President and CEO of CARISMA Therapeutics, and our last guest, Chris Molyneux, is CEO and President of Life Sciences PA.
Let's get to know our first guest, Jim Walker, President and CEO of Velicept Therapeutics. Jim, what is Velicept Therapeutics? What are you guys doing?
Velicept has a compound to treat overactive bladder and irritable bowel syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Where are you from originally?
I was originally from Canada, moved to London in the UK, and then into Indiana, and then finally settled in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Jeffrey?
So, Jim, do you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have one twin brother who I'm 5 minutes older than.
I was just going to ask you the age difference.
Mm-hmm. Ethan?
Jim, what was it like growing up as an identical twin?
A lot of competition that led to compromise and collaboration, but we never finished a one-on-one basketball game together.
Compromise and collaboration. How do they affect you, those traits, and how do they show up for you as a leader today?
I think it just taught me how to work things out. Everybody has different opinions, and of course in business that happens every day, and the ability to compromise, particularly when there's adversity, is critical.
Mm-hmm. John?
Jim, you mentioned competition with your brother. How has that relationship changed over the years, and how has that impacted you as a leader?
So we've gone from competing on just about anything to getting to the breakfast table first to now collaborating very closely on several different business endeavors, and he's my best friend and confidant.
Kate?
Tell me a little bit about your father. What did he do for a living?
My father was a professor in engineering, which was the reason why we moved around so much, and he instilled a great many qualities in us, not the least of which is the focus on education.
And how did that impact you today?
Just made us lifelong learners, and in business, if you're not learning, you're falling behind, and so that was critical for my development.
Drew?
Jim, your dad set the bar pretty high for you guys at a young age. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Academically and from an athletic standpoint, right?
That's correct.
When you look back on that time, what was that like as a kid?
It was tough. It was a lot was expected of us, and we were always striving and persisting in whatever we were doing, and so it just taught us a lot.
And you mentioned your dad also coached a lot of the teams you played on.
Yes, every one of them.
And how was that? How is it having your dad as a coach?
Made for some long rides home, but he taught us never to give up, and that was so helpful to us later in life.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the lesson today when you look back at that? Now that you're a father, somebody setting the bar high. How do you view that today?
Just all about persistence, and you can do anything if you just continue to persist. You're always going to hit adversity, but you never give up.
And do you see how those lessons helped you grow all these businesses?
Absolutely, because you hit adversity every single day in business, and so if you're not willing to find solutions around those obstacles, then you're not going to be in business.
And so when you're faced with a tough decision at the office, what do you hear your dad telling you?
First, just calm down and think through the problem, and find a solution through compromise.
You mentioned you did a lot of moving around as a kid. What was that like?
It was tough. You always had to make new friends, and luckily I had my twin brother as a built-in friend.
Was there one move in particular that was extra difficult for you?
I think the toughest one was going from Indiana to Bethlehem, because we had already established lots of relationships and had been in Indiana for 5 years at that time.
And what did that move teach you?
That you can that moving around doesn't really matter. It's just an opportunity to make new friends and forge new relationships.
How'd you go about making new friends?
I like to always think that we had two shots on goal because of my twin brother, and so we simple through sports or introducing each other to different sets of friends, and that broadened the whole set of friends that we had.
What's that have to do with how you're building this business?
It's all about relationships and connecting with people, and so in sports you're conditioned to work as a team, and so that's something that's been critical in my development.
Jim, you and Neil are identical twins. How are you different, and how do you complement each other?
I think I take a little bit tend to take a little bit more risks than Neil, and so he's always thinking through things a little bit more, and so it's a good balance when we're talking to each other.
How does that risk taking express itself in business?
Well, everything you do in business is risk, pretty much, and so being able to bounce things off of somebody else that you're so close to is very important.
Chris?
So, Jim, you're known as one of Pennsylvania's more successful serial entrepreneurs in the life sciences, and we've already talked about risk, very high risk, long odds in life sciences. You're also a race car driver, also very risky. Some would say you've got a couple of screws loose to take on two very high-risk directions in your life. Does that tie back to anything in your past?
Yeah, it's just the attention to detail, the continual strive to learn, and then achieve things based on that learning, and that all ties in with what my dad taught us, and growing up, and persisting through different obstacles. And there's certainly a lot of obstacles on the racetrack.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey?
In the green room, we were touching on your grandparents, Jim, and tell us about how they lived their life and your. What vision do you have from your grandparents and how they lived?
All my relatives were farmers from Canada, and so from an early age, what I saw was people working literally from 5 till 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and the job never ended, and you could see that in their hands and in their demeanor.
How does that vision impact your daily schedule and your work ethic?
Pretty much nonstop going, and that's just what I learned.
So when you saw Grandmom and Grandpa working at this farm from sun up to sundown and longer, as opposed to you resisting or saying, "Listen, I don't want to have to work," you just sort of thought that's the way life is.
Yeah, I mean, when you see that from an early age and you see what it takes to, make ends meet, that's pretty much the takeaway that you get. That's how.
What do you mean make ends meet? What are you talking about?
Well, it was a hard life. If something didn't go right with the crops or the market when you're selling cattle.
So you're always measuring everything. You're always concerned about the big picture and making sure you get there.
Yes.
So your nature's contingency planning, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
In fact, anybody that's worked for me hears the word contingency at least 5 times a week.
Because you don't like to lose. It's the competitive streak in you that happened with your brother and your dad.
That's right.
Uh-huh. Who's got the next question for him?
Speaking about contingency, when your brother was on the show, he suffered a pretty bad injury in an accident racing cars, and I'm just curious how that impacted you.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's your brother, so you get concerned about that. But one of the things that we've always focused on was that we knew those things are risky, and as long as you enjoy doing them, it's all good.
And how about Mom? What was Mom like?
She instilled a lot of empathy within both my brother and I. Where my dad was more the disciplinarian, and my mom was.
And how has that served you as a leader?
It's all about understanding what each individual is feeling, and if you're not in tune to that, there's no way you can build a team.
Jeffrey?
Jim, we're here at Life Sciences PA this morning. Tell us about the organization for you and your brother, and what value it adds.
For me and my brother, I think my brother would say the same thing. It's all about connecting people. Even this right now, I've met so many great people in just the past hour and heard so many great stories, and for me, that's everything.
The people are everything. So how's Life Sciences PA help you with that kind of stuff?
They connect people. Every event that they organize is about connecting people and mobilizing people towards a common goal.
In other words, it could be investors, it could be employees, it could be consultants. These are all the different people that Life Sciences PA helps you meet?
That's correct.
So Chris really is the organizer. What's the website address of this organization, Velicept Therapeutics?
It's Velicept, VELICEPT.com.
We've been speaking with Jim Walker, President and CEO of Velicept Therapeutics. Back in a moment right after this break. Recognize your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, Executive Leaders Radio. Yes, you can recognize your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, ExecutiveLeadersRadio.com. Simply visit ExecutiveLeadersRadio.com, securely enter their info, and we'll reach out to spotlight your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, ExecutiveLeadersRadio.com. Don't wait. This radio and online social media and search engine exposure is quite valuable. Yes, this radio and online social media and search engine exposure is quite valuable to your business advisors who deserve to be recognized. Visit ExecutiveLeadersRadio.com now to nominate your deserving business advisors for free exposure. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Azam, who's the president and CEO of Tmunity Therapeutics. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You were there.
All right. And what is Tmunity Therapeutics, Oz?
Tmunity Therapeutics is a T-cell engineering company. We re-engineer patients' own blood cells to attempt to cure their cancer.
Wow. Where are you from originally, and how many brothers and sisters?
Originally, I'm from a small town called Rochdale near Manchester in the north of England, and I am the eldest of two. I have a younger sister.
So, Oz, what was going on with you as a kid? What kind of activities did you do, and what were you doing?
So back as a kid, I was interested in soccer. I am a big Manchester United fan. I was into Bruce Lee martial arts, karate in particular, and I was avidly into astronomy.
Mm-hmm. Ethan?
Oz, how did you get into astronomy as a young kid?
I was always fascinated by the planets. It was always about the planets and planetariums. And then I got a little bit hooked onto classical Greek and connecting sort of constellations and stars together. That's how it all started.
As a young boy looking to the stars, what did you think about?
It's possible.
What do you mean it's possible?
Always being thought of and thinking about, the impossibility of life, particularly about being an immigrant and what is possible, what isn't. My dad was a factory worker, my mum was a seamstress, so you were going to be a factory worker.
What does it mean, being possible, mean to you today, and what you're doing today?
It means to me you can absolutely reach the stars and do anything you want. Cancer is curable. People a decade ago wouldn't have said that. I actually had the privilege of working on a product that actually cures cancer. And that's why I think everything's possible.
Perfect, Ethan. John?
Oz, what did you learn from being an older sibling?
I learnt very quickly that my younger sister became my older sibling as life went on. And that was a big learning for me.
Tell us a little more about that for a moment.
So my niece was born with a very rare form of muscular dystrophy, and my younger sibling ended up is a full-time carer for my niece, who by all intents should have passed away when she was 2, but is now 26 years old.
And how did that experience change you?
It changed me because I saw this massive evolution in my sister, going from the younger sibling to becoming this very mature woman ahead of her time, but also becoming so stoic and so patient with everything that life threw her, and that's had a profound effect on me.
You have a great deal of respect for your sister, don't you?
I do.
How's that affecting your building the team nowadays, this respect for women?
I have this anchor and ear in my voice all the time when I think about her, even when I'm speaking to you guys now. It's that humility. which I believe women have in far more abundance than men. And I think having that anchor in life is incredibly important as you build a business.
Kate?
When we were in the green room, you mentioned the word spirituality, and that's what you learned from your experience with your sister. Talk more about that.
Yeah, so because of the trials and tribulations my sister went through, she really focused on faith. That was the anchor she took. And that anchoring then led to me seeing her humility. So for me, the connection to spirituality in life, looking at her, is the ability to be humble as a human being, and how important that is in business.
And talk more about that importance in business and spirituality.
Firstly, I think you've got to have an anchor beyond just the money side of it. I mean, we're in life sciences. A very special part of the business is the patient and the focus on that. And it's so easy to get lost in the day-to-day of running a business, raising money, going out on Wall Street. And I think having that grounding in your company culture is really, really important. And we're very privileged because we have patients, and it's easy for us. We can bring that story in and really motivate people. So hopefully that gives you a sense of humility.
Tell us about a time you were told something wasn't possible as a kid, but you overcame those doubts.
It was impossible for me to become a black belt in karate, and I took that up because I was bullied in school. And so when people found out I was doing it, it was a waste of time, but I did it. So,
tell us more about that experience and how you felt being bullied and overcoming that.
What it taught me was how to always fight for the underdog.
And how does that relate to what you're doing today?
I think very different about projects and programs, right? People can be very dismissive about something that's very difficult, or what appears to be a not well thought out idea. And I think making the time as a leader to really think through at different angles, and seeing how you can really make something out of nothing in certain cases, I think is an important trait for leaders because in our business we see many great ideas that have been thrown to the wayside and turn out to be brilliant ideas. So take stock and take heed, and just think before you dismiss somebody or an idea.
Did the bullies change your attitude once you got your black belt?
Yeah, to an extent. Not completely, but for sure. The main thing was I got my self-confidence as a kid.
Yep. And tell us about soccer. Why'd you like playing soccer?
Because it was the main activity where I grew up. But, in the north of England, we're a soccer heartland, right? It is the sport. And so it was the one way where we all got together. Kids just picked up a ball in the street or got on the field. It was our way of bonding.
And what was your position on the team?
I played defense. I used to play right defense.
And what would your coach tell us about you as a player?
He had thighs at the age of 12, 13 that were like tree trunks, but he could never stop anybody getting past him.
And what did playing soccer teach you about running a business?
Very importantly is the aspect of how you think about a team. Soccer is all about changing people out. It's a sustained game, right? It's not stop and start. It's a tough game, and it's taught me the ability to look out for your team and players and know when they need to be cycled out and cycled in, depending on the situation.
I just want to go back to your sister for a minute. What is the key lesson you have learned from your sister, kind of dealing with what she's dealt with?
Tenacity.
Tell us more about that.
Never giving up. There were so many times in her life she could have just given up with my niece, because my niece has had a very tortuous medical life. And there were times when we really thought it was the end of the road.
And how did that make you feel to see your sister handle that situation like that?
Made me incredibly proud, but also made me very humble.
And do you think that's inspired you as a leader?
Absolutely. Absolutely has inspired me.
And when you're faced with a tough decision, what do you hear your sister telling you?
Think of all aspects.
As in England, you were the son of an immigrant, and you felt a bit like an outsider. Now you're the immigrant. How does that express your outlook?
It reinforces to me the importance of diversity. When I was growing up as a kid as an immigrant, or the son of immigrants, times were tough. We're talking about the late 60s, early 70s, when the first wave of mass immigration happened from the ex-British colonies. It was a tough time. My father was a civil servant, but he couldn't get a job as a civil servant, so he became a factory worker. Didn't really see my dad until the age of 12, to be honest, because he worked nights in a factory. My mum was a seamstress. So through that, there was a lot of themes that it then played in my later life, particularly about work ethics and time management and how you think about all of these things.
Hey, Oz, you're an inspiring businessman leading a company curing cancer. You're also a physician, an MD. When did your interest start in pursuing medicine, and why didn't you take the path of a practicing physician?
So I started to first think about medicine when I was probably about 15, 16, when I really started to really get into science and really enjoy it. And I really wanted to pursue a career with something that applied science practically, and I couldn't think of a better way to do that than to pursue a career in medicine. And I love being a physician. I actually practiced as an obstetrician and gynecologist in the UK before I actually then decided to evolve and think about how do I apply medical skills to an even bigger setting and see how many patients I could try and make a difference with by evolving my career, and that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing now.
Oz, I understand you have 2 daughters.
I do.
What are their names?
My eldest is Sarah. She's 17, and my youngest is Natasha. She is 13.
What have you learned from your 2 daughters?
From my youngest, I have learned a whole new world that I never knew existed, which is the world of esports. She's a big gamer. And recently she took me to an esports convention, which blew my mind on this new economy that I never knew existed. From my eldest, I've learned a lot about empathy and love. She's a interesting kid. She's an autistic child, but a high-functioning autistic kid. But she's amazing because most autistic kids are isolated. She actually is really good at building bonds, which is very, very atypical for autistic kids. So it's seeing how she develops her network in her own unique way has been quite revealing to me.
What's the website address for Tmunity Therapeutics?
It is Tmunity, TMUNITY.com.
Let me have that one more time.
TMUNITY.com.
We've been speaking with Oz Azam, President and CEO of Tmunity Therapeutics here on Executive Leaders Radio. We'll be back in a moment, right after this break. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Steve Kelly, President and CEO of CARISMA Therapeutics. Stephen, what is CARISMA Therapeutics? What are you guys doing?
CARISMA is a biotechnology company that's researching the ability to re-engineer a person's macrophages and use them to treat their cancer.
Mm-hmm. Where are you from?
I'm from a hippie family, so Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, Springfield, Oregon, Finn Rock, Oregon, Vida, Oregon.
All right, I get the idea. How many brothers and sisters?
I have an older brother and a younger half-sister.
Jeffrey?
So tell us what happened with the family when you were growing up in younger years.
My parents divorced when I was 7 years old, and we split up. I went with my father. My brother went with my mother.
And how did that impact you? How did you feel about that?
It was pretty isolating. I think at the time it was a surprise, obviously, and made the fragility of a family readily apparent.
What did you learn? What did you learn from the experience?
I think the compensation is in my own family with my current family and my kids. We're very, very tight, and I overcompensated that way.
How about in terms of how you're building this team at work?
Yeah, it's a small group. We've grown from about 3 people to 30 people in the last 2 years.
But how's that stuff that happened in your childhood, that disruption, how's that affecting your building the team?
I think it's really important to keep everyone tight and closely aligned in a uniform goal.
So it looks like that struggle really manifests in terms of a really quality, tight-knit team in terms of business.
I would agree, yes.
John?
Steve, what was your anchor or rock that helped you to stabilize things amidst that chaos?
Sure. We moved every year. I went to a new school every year. And not being a particularly good athlete, I focused on academics.
John, what's the next question from that one? What else are you thinking?
Well,
yep.
It's what you can control. Right. So how has that impacted you now as a leader? What do you find that you can control now as a leader that makes a difference for your employees and the patients you're serving?
I think, again, we have a uniform goal, and we're trying to cure cancer. And if we all have that as our goal, then everyone can work towards that.
Ethan?
That's what we try to instill.
Mm-hmm. So, Steve, what impact did that have on you moving around so much as you're growing up?
Well, I was always the new kid and maybe a little bit awkward at the time, and just had to develop resiliency and independence.
How'd you do that? Can you recall an experience that you had as a kid?
Yeah. How'd you develop the resiliency? What was going on?
So I think it was really, again, focusing on academics is what I tried to do, and it was a uniform theme. No matter what school I'm at, they're going to teach the same things, and if you can be the best in your class at that, that's what you should strive to do.
Kate?
You had mentioned that your mom took your brother and your dad took you. Why?
I think it had to do with our personalities and our ability to exist with the individuals. My father was very strict, and I had a pretty thick skin, and I could handle the way he worked.
And how did he work with you?
It was very challenging. I had to do chores constantly and do them very, very well, or do them right the first time, essentially what it was. And he also wanted us to have a very high academic standard. A students was the only acceptable way to be.
And how does that relate to how you work today in your business?
Yeah, I think that I look for people that are independent, they're hardworking, they're very smart, they're driven, yet at the same time, I think that it's really important that we tie together as a team.
Drew?
Steve, you mentioned multiple times being from hippie parents. I'm just curious, what is the positive takeaway of hippie parents?
I think we moved around a lot, and I think that the net outcome of that is that you have to be able to survive in multiple environments. And again, the ability to enter a new situation and you could stand on your independence, but also network within that new environment.
And it sounds like Dad set the bar really high. I mean, academically, chores at home. How did that impact you?
I think I work hard, and I think it instilled a work ethic, and I think that was essential to growing into who I am today.
Didn't you mention that when you were a kid, from the time you were 11 to 16, on Saturday and Sunday, you and Dad would chop firewood?
We would. So
why were you doing that?
We were a very poor family, and one way to add additional income is we would cut firewood, a quart of firewood on Saturday, a quart of firewood on Sunday, and we did that for years. And it was a supplement to our income.
Why are you smiling when you say that?
Because I think it's really funny. When we cut firewood, basically my dad ran the chainsaw and I did everything else.
What are you talking about? What do you mean?
So when you're out in the woods and you have to bring the wood to a central place, you had to split the firewood, you had to load the truck and unload it when you got home, and then we would deliver it to someone. And my dad's special service for them was for me to stack it, and so it's a lot of work.
So you really know how to work hard.
Yeah, and I got $2.50 a quart. It was great.
So you really know how to work hard, and it's not in direct proportion to the dollars you're making. What's that ability of yours to really put your nose to the grindstone, do whatever it takes, and not necessarily worry about the immediate dollars? What's that have to do with what you do for a living, like you did with the firewood?
Sure. We're working in a very, very challenging industry and incredibly complex biology, and so we have to continue to overcome obstacles in doing something that no one's ever done before. And so we have to have that passion and that drive.
Peter? Steve, being on the cutting edge of research as you are can be lonely. What specially equips you to manage that loneliness, push through it?
Well, I think as I was growing up, a very lonely childhood, because we were in the middle of nowhere and at times. And I think being able to be self-sufficient is important. I think similarly, we're in a company that in some ways is networked with an ecosystem here in Philadelphia, but still we're different. We're trying to do something no one's ever done before.
And you mentioned that you hire people that are like that as well. Talk a little bit more about that.
I think the characteristics I look for are smart people, self-motivated people, and collegial people.
Wait a second. You mentioned earlier you tied in when Peter was talking to you about being isolated. You mentioned you're tied into this ecosystem. What does that have to do with this organization, Life Sciences Pennsylvania and Chris Molyneux?
Yeah, so it's a large organization in Pennsylvania, and I think it's important that we have a central group that represents our interest as an industry, and I think that Chris and Life Sciences PA does that very well.
Chris, when you took over this organization, what size was it versus what size is it now?
In 2009, we had 278 member companies, and today we have 856.
Oh, okay. And you're the executive director, huh? You've built this thing.
with a lot of help from a very large board of directors. And the organization has been around for 30 years. It's very well established.
All right. What was the question you have for Steve Kelly?
Well, Steve, CARISMA is not your first startup rodeo. If I counted correctly, I think this is the 6th startup where you have served as CEO. Why so much moving around? And does that reflect anything from your moving around as a child?
So I think change, maybe I'm looking for that change, but actually what I'm doing in the companies is trying to drive the science. I think this industry is driven by biology and science, and so each of the moves that I've made is to continue to grow on that effort. And this landing at CARISMA 2 years ago, it's the most cutting edge, I think, of anything.
Well, you're
done.
certainly willing to, you certainly are comfortable with change, and you're also comfortable putting your head down. That's what these startups and these builds are all about. Jeffrey?
So, Steve, you had some strong experiences with your dad growing up. What's the experience been like as a father of your 2 sons? Tell us about that.
Sure. I have a 16-year-old son and a 14-year-old son, and I think we have a very, very tight relationship. And unlike when for my father, who really wasn't there when for school and things like that, I've been a coach of my kids in virtually every sport they've been in. I've been a Cub Scout leader. We have a very, very tight bond.
What have you learned from your boys?
I think I'm a much nicer, more open person, and I think I'm trying to mirror for them. Maybe in the past I was stoic and hard to get to know. I've been trying very hard, and by modeling that for my kids, because I think it's important for them.
What's important for them?
I think being able to encounter different environments. So, for example, we moved from Boston, where we've been living for the last 8 years, to Pennsylvania. It's a brand new environment. So I think that they have to, I had done it when I was a kid, but I think they need to know it and how to navigate in a new environment as well.
Because how's that help them in life? What are you talking about?
I think it'll help them. It'll provide the same resilience that I think I developed when I was a kid, and I think that having that will be important for them as they grow through life as well.
Mm-hmm. So you're all about relationships. You're all about close knit. What's the website address of this organization, CARISMA Therapeutics? CARISMATX.com. CARISMATX.com. Let me have that one more time.
CARISMATX.com.
We've been speaking with Steve Kelly, President and CEO of CARISMA Therapeutics here on Executive Leaders Radio. Don't forget to visit our website. It's executiveleadersradio.com. To learn more about our executive leaders, it's executiveleadersradio.com. To learn more about our executive leaders, we'll be back in a moment right after this break. You now can recognize your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, executiveleadersradio.com. Yes, you can recognize your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, executiveleadersradio.com. Simply visit executiveleadersradio.com, securely enter their info, and we'll reach out to spotlight your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, executiveleadersradio.com. Don't wait. This radio and online social media and search engine exposure is quite valuable to your advisors. Yes, this radio and online social media exposure is free and quite valuable to your business advisors who deserve to be recognized. Visit executiveleadersradio.com now to nominate your deserving business advisors. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Chris Molyneux, President and CEO of Life Sciences Pennsylvania. What is Life Sciences Pennsylvania? What are you guys doing here?
Life Sciences Pennsylvania is the statewide trade association for the life sciences community that calls Pennsylvania home. So we represent biopharma companies, medical device companies, diagnostics companies, research institutions, really the whole life sciences ecosystem of the state.
What kind of stuff do you do to connect people to different people? What kind of people do you connect to whom?
Well, our primary responsibility as a trade association is public policy advocacy. So I spent a lot of time in Harrisburg, down in Washington, D.C., advocating for a public policy environment that makes Pennsylvania attractive for companies to grow here. But the other accountability is facilitating connections, really connecting anyone or any organization with the resources they need to grow and succeed.
Mm-hmm. Where are you from originally?
I grew up on Long Island in New York in a family I was one of 6 kids.
Where are you in the pecking order?
Number 3.
Jeff?
So tell us about Mom and Dad. What were they like?
My parents are both very friendly, very warm, engaging people. My father is an attorney, still practicing as an arbitrator today at 89 years old. My mother is a real estate agent, residential real estate. Both very warm, loving people who taught us about the importance of faith and family, primarily.
Which are you more like, Chris?
I think I've got my father's work ethic, my mother's sense of humor. I think probably a little bit of each.
Mm-hmm. John?
Chris, how has being a father impacted you as a leader?
Well, I've got 3 boys that I'm very, very proud of. I think they have taught me a lot about self-discipline. They've taught me a lot about being open to other opinions and views, points of view. They grew up in the public school system and were exposed to a lot of different types of people and teachers, and they've taught me to be, I think, more I guess more open to opposing points of view.
Well, Chris, you strike me as someone who never wants to let anyone else down. If I'm right about that, tell me how that's made you a better father.
I think I think I learned that from my parents. I also learned that from one of my earliest bosses. I had the privilege of working for President George H.W. Bush, and he taught all of his staff, including me, that a life well lived was a life that included service to others, and I feel that in my bones every day.
Chris, from the first time I met you, you're very approachable and almost a great coach with how you spoke with me, and I'm just curious, where did that come from?
I think that came from being exposed to a lot of great teachers and coaches myself. I had wonderful coaches growing up in grade school and high school and college athletics, and always appreciated what they did for me, and I try to instill that in my children. But I also take that to my team, because I know that a team that works in a culture of encouragement and nurturing, not pampering, but encouragement and nurturing, is going to be most successful.
And it seemed like your parents kind of instilled emotional intelligence in you at a young age. Is that true?
Absolutely. My mother in particular, I think, taught us to maintain a sense of humor, that there are very few things in life that should really bring you down for very long. Also a reliance on our faith. But that sense of humor, finding the sense of humor in just about every situation, I think is important. Keep things real. Keep things in perspective.
Chris, what's your earliest recollection of being a conductor?
Oh, I was one of probably 2 or 3 guys in the neighborhood. I grew up in a town on Long Island that had a lot of children around, and we were 2 or 3 of us were always pulling together pickup games and baseball and football, basketball, and then I moved the summer after my freshman year in high school. Moved outside of Boston and had to start it all over again. And I think I was sort of forced to make friends and be outgoing and pulling people together.
Always the consistent organizer. And how does that show up for you today as the CEO of LSPA?
Well, a trade association is a collection of a lot of different interests. We have 856 member companies, so I get about 950 different opinions on anything we do. And it's important to balance those and coordinate those because it's a voluntary organization. So I've got to keep people happy and continue to provide value.
Earlier, you mentioned that your parents were very responsible. What does the word responsibility mean to you?
I think it's maybe cliche to say always doing the right thing, but doing what you believe is right and being true to yourself. My father often quotes Shakespeare and other and philosophers about being true to thyself and relying on your faith and relying on your experience. To do the right thing and set an example for others. I think my ultimate responsibility is to my children, and to teach them to be responsible, teach them to take the right path in life, whatever it is, faced with a lot of different influences that we see in the world today. So my number one responsibility is to my children to set the right example. And that goes to business, too, setting the right example for my employees, because we represent a very important industry.
Speaking of which, how many board members are you responsible for?
We have 43 board members, which may sound like a lot, but it's actually pretty typical of a trade association. So if you look across the membership of my organization, our board of directors reflects that membership. So we've got representation from academia and small companies, large companies, and so on.
You've done other things, run other organizations. Why Pennsylvania Biotech? Why this life sciences? Why is this mission so large?
This one is particularly important and special to me, Pete, because it gives me the opportunity to use two of my best honed competencies personally. So I believe I'm an effective communicator, and I'm also, I believe, pretty effective at managing relationships. And trade associations, whether it's lobbying or connecting individuals and companies with resources, those two core competencies of communications and managing relationships are crucial, and it's for an industry that I believe is the most important industry on the planet. These are scientists and companies who are trying to save patients' lives, who go to work every day against very long odds to save patients' lives. I don't think there's any better calling for me based on what I'm capable of.
Tmunity is involved in LSPA. What's it like working with Chris Molyneux, and what do you get from the organization when you show up?
So it's absolutely fantastic working with Chris because of his broad experiences, particularly for companies like us when we think about policy and how we want to make therapies that are very difficult to make, also approved and then also reimbursed. And this is a big challenge for the space of pharmaceutics as a whole. And I think, Chris brings that diplomatic skill set that's so desperately needed in a sector which often is pitched as the pariah. And so, without LSPA and groups like LSPA, we will really suffer. For me personally, from an LSPA perspective, time is a real precious commodity. So actually getting in to an event where I know I'm going to connect with all the right people, the right networks, and actually expand my networks for the benefit of my business is a really important key feature for LSPA for me.
What's the special sauce that Chris Molyneux brings to the party here?
I think he's, first of all, his communication skills are stellar. He can bridge the aisle very well. He's very, very politically adept in the nicest possible way. And I think he's really, really passionate about this ecosystem in terms of how do you drive and get this to a next level of excellence. And, we have an ambition here to compete to be one of the most innovative hotspots on the planet when it comes to life sciences. And I think Chris really resonates and epitomizes that mission for us.
Do you find that Chris is sincere, and do you believe that he really wants to deliver what he's talking about?
Sincerity, I think, for sure, because I've known Chris now for over 3 years in business settings and non-business settings. So, I speak from personal experiences that the trait of sincerity is a very strong gene that he possesses.
So, Chris is the head of this really well-known organization, this very important organization in the life science industry. And, Chris, I'm wondering, why do you do this? I mean, you could go, get a job at any pharmaceutical company or run a pharmaceutical company or a life science company. Why are you doing this?
I love it. I love the companies that I represent. I love what they do. I love the staff that I manage, and frankly, I also love a good fight. And as Oz mentioned, this is an industry that is sometimes maligned, is often maligned unfairly because of a lack of understanding by many politicians and many members of the media. So I love a good fight, and this is an industry worth fighting for.
It sounds to me like you really enjoy a build and pulling these relationships together. What's the website address of this organization known as Life Sciences?
LifeSciencesPA.org.
Let me have that one more time.
LifeSciencesPA, one word, LifeSciencesPA.org.
Excellent. We've been speaking with Chris Molyneux, President and CEO of Life Sciences PA. And Jeffrey, can you give us a rundown on who else else we've had the opportunity of hanging out with today.
Sure, what a great show. We had Jim Walker, President and CEO of Velicept Therapeutics, Azam, President and CEO of Tmunity Therapeutics, and also the 2019 CEO of the Year for LSPA, Steve Kelly, President and CEO, CARISMA Therapeutics, and Chris Molyneux, the President and CEO of Life Sciences PA.
I would like to thank my co-hosts, including Jeff Mack and Shannon Lane, Newmark Knight Frank, Kate Heeman, Prelude Solutions, Ethan Milrod, GoTo, Drew Hanlon, Peter Snelling, Merrill Lynch, and John Jacobs, Harmony Biosciences, for giving me hand structuring the questions. Hopefully providing our listening audience an educational and entertaining show. I'd like to thank our listening audience for listening. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a radio show. Don't forget to visit our website, executiveleadersradio.com, to learn more about our executive leaders. It's executiveleadersradio.com to learn more about our executive leaders. Thank you for joining us today, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.